When I kicked down the door, everyone in the room was frozen. Everything seemed to have stopped. Stan was in his place, and Zach was already behind her. She had clearly lost control and seemed to enjoy it. However, let us start from the beginning. I returned home earlier than usual, but my mind was full of thoughts about work. The first thing that caught my attention was that Laura's car was parked in the driveway. Upon entering the house, I heard her voice, soft and agitated. "I cannot talk right now. He could return at any moment." My feet took me to the living room before I had time to process what I had heard. Susan was seated on the couch, her phone in hand. When she saw me, her eyes widened. She hastily ended the call and nervously put the phone away. "Nick, you are early." Her smile was uncharacteristically bright and strained. "Yes," I replied, watching as she swiftly locked the phone and placed it face down. "Is everything all right?" I inquired. "Of course." She stood up, straightening her shirt. "Just work-related matters. You know how it is when dealing with clients." I nodded in understanding, but something was bothering me. Susan had always been a straightforward person, but now she seemed like she was speaking a different language. Every day, this feeling grew more intense. Susan had changed. She seemed distant. She hardly ate at dinner, lost in her thoughts. Then, she would return to reality with a forced smile. "I'm heading over to Sarah's for drinks," she said one evening, grabbing her keys. I watched as she cheerfully headed for the door. "Have a good time," I said, but she had already left. That night, I lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. The steady breathing next to me seemed like a lie, and my mind frantically replayed every conversation we'd had, every detail that seemed strange. Whispers on the phone, blocked calls, sudden work appointments, and parties. I tried to tell myself it was all just paranoia, that Susan loved me and we were happy, but doubt had taken root, creeping into every reasonable thought. I couldn't sleep, and the last few weeks spun through my mind. Her coldness, the hidden calls, the way she avoided my eyes. At 3 a.m, I finally couldn't take it anymore. Getting out of bed without waking her, I tiptoed downstairs to the living room, where her bag was sitting on the table as if to mock me. For a moment, I hesitated, realizing that once I opened it, there would be no going back. But I needed to know. My hands shook so much, I could barely open her phone. Inside, I found a message from someone named Mac. "I can't wait to feel your hands on me. I missed you, darling. Nick will be away next week. Please come," Susan replied. I felt unwell, but I continued to flip through the pages, unable to stop. Then I saw it, plans for a threesome in our living room, with Stan and another man, by Zach. I wanted to shout, wake Susan and confront her with the reality right then, but something restrained me. Cold, calculated anger began to fill every fiber of my being. "Do you wish to play?" I whispered to myself. "Very well, let's play." The following morning, I acted as if nothing had occurred. I kissed Susan goodbye and assured her that I loved her. The falsehood tasted bitter. As soon as she departed, I set to work. I visited an electronics store and purchased all the concealed cameras and microphones that I could find. Throughout the day, I installed them in the living room, outside picture frames, within pots containing plants, anywhere they could be discreetly placed. My hands now felt confident. I felt like a hunter laying a trap. "Please try to hide, Susan," I whispered as I set up the last camera. It was positioned perfectly to cover the sofa, where we usually cuddled and watched movies. Today, however, we had different plans. I stepped away, assessing my work. Every angle was covered. Every whisper would be recorded. I had all the evidence I needed to destroy her world. A part of me felt sick about what I was doing, while another, larger part felt a rush of excitement. Let her believe she had succeeded. The next day, I played out the farewell scene according to the script. I kissed Susan on the cheek and said goodbye, wheeling my suitcase towards the car. Once I had disappeared around the corner, I quickly returned, hiding a few blocks from the house in a secluded location where I could observe everything that happened. Time passed slowly, with thoughts randomly swirling in my mind, contemplating various possibilities. Part of me hoped for nothing to happen, that Susan would prove herself worthy of my trust. However, another part, consumed by anger and pain, yearned desperately for proof of her treachery. Soon, dusk fell upon the street, at which point I saw a vehicle approach our residence. My heart pounded so forcefully that it felt as if it would burst from my chest. A man exited the vehicle. It was Stan. With such confidence, he strode towards the door, as if he were familiar with the place. I gripped the steering wheel with such force that my knuckles whitened. All my self-control was stretched to its limit. However, the cameras were already in operation, and everything was progressing according to plan. Soon, I would have all the proof necessary to expose Susan's falsehoods. I was watching the live stream on my mobile device. Susan was moving around the living area, tidying and lighting candles. The soft illumination enveloped her form, clad in a silk nightgown that I had given her for our anniversary. My jaw tightened so much that I could sense my teeth grinding together. Stan entered as if he were the owner of the house. Susan rushed towards him, and their lips met in a prolonged kiss. The two then collapsed onto our sofa, the one we had chosen together, laughing and daydreaming about how our children might play on it in the future. "God, I've missed you so much," Susan whispered, stroking his hair. Stan smiled. "It's only been a few days, honey." She pouted, then softly laughed as he nuzzled her neck. There was a knock at the door. Susan's eyes sparkled like a child at Christmas. "It's probably Zach." She jumped up, ran to the door, and pulled it open to reveal a tall, muscular man with a smug grin. "Hello, beautiful," he said. Susan pulled him inside and gave him a passionate kiss. "Good that you could both come." My throat tightened with disgust. Anger and betrayal swept over me like a wave. My hands creaked as I clenched the phone. I tried to remain calm, observing their every move, collecting evidence of her unfaithfulness. They sat on the couch, with Susan nestling between them as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Their hands wandered over her body, touching places only I had the right to touch. "So," Zach said in a quiet and husky voice, "where do we begin?" "I have a few suggestions," Susan replied with a cheerful laugh. I had not heard that light-hearted and carefree laughter in months. I did not look up from my screen, feeling my blood pounding in my temples as I watched the unsettling scene unfold before me. They were sprawled out on our couch, the very same one that Susan and I had once shared for movie nights and popcorn. Now, it had become the stage for their intimate encounter. Stan's fingers gently slid down Susan's neck, and she arched toward him, her laughter filling the living room and causing my stomach to tighten. Zach's hand slowly made its way under Susan's shirt, and the camera captured every detail. Susan leaned back with closed eyes, a playful smile playing on her lips as she whispered something to the two of them. Although I could not make out the exact words, the underlying meaning was clear. They did not waste any time. First, the shirts disappeared and then the trousers. Fresh bursts of laughter and delight filled the air. I recorded everything, every detail. My finger remained stationary on the screen as the sounds of mirth grew more intense and strident. Susan was moaning and begging for more, which was like salt on the wound. I reminded myself that there was no going back. The camera captured her face distorted with passion, a vile reflection of what true attraction should be. For a moment, I wanted to intervene, but I had to gather evidence. I wanted Susan to see for herself what she had done. The living room, our living room, had transformed into a scene from an amateur movie, where everything seemed grotesque and cruel. And so, abruptly, I entered them in the midst of their entertainment. I kicked the door and time stood still. Sounds, movements, even the air seemed to freeze. Stan stood at the doorway, and Zach had already settled behind her. Zach seemed to slow down, as if his mind refused to accept what was happening. Susan's head whipped around. Her eyes widened, and her lips were parted in a silent moan that seemed frozen in the air. As her gaze met mine, her face paled. I took a step forward. The room seemed to shrink around me, like I was drowning in thick, foul air. Everything seemed compressed, like I had been holding my breath for days. Her expression was not one of fear. It was shock. She had never expected me to come and see all of this. "What is it?" The voice I heard sounded like mine, but it was alien, too calm, without the hint of the storm raging within me. My fists were clenched, and I felt as if my knuckles would burst. For a moment, the entire scene seemed like a distorted portrait. Susan pinned against the wall, Zach frozen in place, and I standing like an unyielding executioner who had arrived 5 seconds too late for the job. Stan was the first to recoil, stumbling over the couch and grabbing for his clothes. With his back to me, I could hear him murmur, This shouldn't be happening. Be quiet, I muttered, though I didn't hear my own words. Everything around me had become a blur, and my heart was beating so hard it felt like it might burst. Susan was breathing erratically, tugging at the first thing she could find, some kind of plaid, as if it could fix everything. It was a pathetic sight. "Nick, please," her voice trembled, pleading, that familiar inflection that always saved her. "Please, after all this." I took another step forward. Zach did not move, frozen like a mannequin forgotten on the window ledge. Susan cast him a desperate, helpless glance, as if he might save her. "Do you think I am an idiot?" My hand twitched, and I was prepared to grab something and break it. Stan panicked, jumping off the couch like a wounded animal that had managed to escape. He barely had time to put on his shirt before stumbling into his pants, as if he had forgotten how to use them. Zach was not much better. His hands trembled as he searched for the belt on the floor. He did not even attempt to make eye contact with me, lowering his head as if hoping that, if he breathed quietly enough, it would all go away, and I would forget his existence. But that was not the case. "Leave," I say in a calm, firm tone. There is no shouting. They do not deserve it. At first, they do not react. They simply rush around the room, frantically gathering their belongings and shoes. This hasty behavior only serves to reinforce their foolishness. Stan makes his way towards the door, nearly tripping over himself, his face flushed with shame, like a child caught stealing sweets. Zach, even more slowly, with trembling hands, holds his shoes under one arm and heads for the exit, without even attempting to put them on. After they leave, the only remaining sound is the sharp click of the closing door. Susan, however, remains where she is. Her eyes shine with false tears. She desperately tries to elicit some sympathy from me after all she has done. "Nick, please." Her voice cracks, breaks. I look at her with a cold, blank expression. My jaw is set, but I am not saying anything yet. I let her squirm in her attempt to justify herself. She is fidgeting on the couch nervously, pulling on the robe as if it can hide what I have already seen. "Go away, Susan," I say in a flat, emotionless tone. Her face twists as if she is about to break down. Her shoulders shake with sobs. Her usual game has reached its maximum, but it has not worked this time. Susan cringes and covers her face with her hands. Even in the midst of her dramatic breakdown, she hesitates. She still hopes I will give in. For the first time in a long while, I feel nothing. I sat down at the dining table, with my laptop in front of me, and the house was deathly silent. This was unusual and unsettling. My mind replayed the events over and over, but I forced myself to set it aside and focus on the task at hand. Opening the browser, I began searching for divorce lawyers in the area. I found a divorce template and started to fill it out. Names, addresses, wedding dates. It felt mechanical, as if our lives had been reduced to checkboxes and blank spaces. As I filled in each field, a strange calmness overtook me. The anger that had consumed me since this morning faded away, leaving a cold resolve in its place. Carefully, I listed our assets, debts, belongings, everything we had built together over the years, now reduced to a list under the appropriate section. When I reached the point regarding the reasons for the separation, my fingers paused over the keyboard. Infidelity. I typed the word and stared at the screen as if expecting it to alter the entire picture. Then, I attached a note regarding the collected video footage. When the documents were completed, I pressed the print button. The noise of the printer seemed deafening in the otherwise silent room. I carefully collected the warm pages, placed them in a stack, and headed to the living area. On the table where only a few hours prior I had witnessed my marriage collapse, I placed the documents. I took a pen, wrote a simple message, and affixed it to the papers. There is no further discussion to be had. I stood back and surveyed the room. The next morning, I woke up at 6 a.m., and my thoughts were racing. The divorce documents on the coffee table brought back memories of the previous day's events. However, I was determined not to let them stop me. I picked up my phone and opened the contact list: friends, family, and colleagues. It was time for them to know the truth about my situation. With a few taps, I started sending recordings. "I think you should watch this," I wrote in each message, attaching a video of Susan's true self. My finger hovered over the send button for a moment, but only for a second. Then, I pressed send. There was no going back. After a few minutes, my phone started buzzing with notifications. A wave of shocked messages filled the screen, expressing support and disbelief. "Nick, I'm sorry," my best friend texted. "I can't believe what she's done," my sister replied. I observed as rumors circulated through our social network like wildfire. It was likely that Susan's phone was inundated with messages, as I received the first one from her around 8 a.m. "Nick, we need to discuss this. What you are doing is cruel," the message read. I scoffed and deleted the message without responding. Cruel? She had no understanding of what cruelty meant. Another message followed. "Please, let me explain, Nick." Remove. Answer your phone, damn it. Ignore. Block. Methodically, I went through Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, removing Susan from my online presence. Every trace of her was deleted, as if she never existed. By noon, my phone rang. First were the parents. Susan's mother was weeping, begging me to reconsider. Her father was enraged and promised to express his thoughts. "It is not worth it," I said coldly. "She is dead to me." I immersed myself in work, immersed in project plans and countless meetings with clients. An unrelenting stream of messages from mutual acquaintances continued to keep me updated on her situation. "She is in a difficult state," one acquaintance wrote. "She attempted to explain herself at a cafe, but nobody wants to listen." Good, I thought. Let her experience at least a small portion of the pain she has caused me. As the day progressed, my feelings became more complex. Emotions swirled within me, like a chaotic mixture. There was an unsettling, even sadistic pleasure in watching her life unravel. But beneath that surface, there was also another, deeper, dull rage that fueled every action I took. I remained at work until the late hours, unwilling to return home, or rather, to our home. When I finally arrived home, the first thing I did was pour a drink and sit in the darkness of the living room. I lifted my glass in mock salute, muttering under my breath, "To your suffering," in order to move forward and never again be so vulnerable. If you enjoyed this story and would like to hear more exciting stories like it, please like and subscribe to our channel. Enable notifications to ensure you do not miss any new and incredible stories each week. If you have any wild stories or ideas you would like us to bring to life, feel free to leave them in the comment section. I will be happy to read them. Thank you for watching.